Welcome to part 3, friends. We are officially at the end of our journey. This is where we take our number one hit song, get it mixed, and get paid by the client, right? You silly people. Everyone knows there's no money in music. All right, seriously. Let's get down to brass tacks. So, this is the mixing segment, and there's a lot of different ways that we can go about this. So, just to start out, since we didn't do an overall montage or a look at the song as a whole in the part 2 video, what I want to do at the top is we've got all the analog tracks that were tracked through the API console, and we've got all the digital tracks that were tracked through the Unison preamps. What I want to do now before we pass anything through the console, I just want to do a quick A/B between the analog mix and the digital mix. And I've done some things in terms of mixing, but it's very minimal. This isn't a full mix that I would normally do. I've basically just thrown some EQ on tracks just to take out some mud and some high stuff, and maybe a little bit of boosting and cutting and a little bit of compression overall. So let's just go ahead and do a quick A/B between hardware and software.
San Francisco, let myself go, not in the ways that all of my friends said help me to grow. Slept through the days, worked in the nights, wrote songs in cages of beautiful places I never afford, 'cause that was word song. Burn so much brighter when you're on the run. Darker the places, smaller those spaces, and all of that hard living fun. You're on the run. Turn 31, hard living ain't fun. You crave something stable, try to enable healthier ways. The bright city lights drown out the night. Run till the stars shine through the darkness, make it your home. 'Cause that word song burns so much brighter when you're on the run. Darker the places, smaller those spaces, and all of that hard living fun. Days grow shorter and the years shuffle by. Remember a time when the darkness was a quiet you craved, and the light is more like a judgment than the freedom it offers you now. Run to your shelter, run to your light, 'cause that westward sun burns so much brighter when you're on the run. Darker the places, smaller those spaces, made all of that hard living fun. You're on the run.
Now that you have a general idea of how the straight digital bounces of the mix sound, now we're going to actually start feeding stuff into my console and apply the Luna summing. One of the biggest misconceptions that I see about how modern API consoles are designed is that people think that there's transformers and op amps on every single channel of the console. And that's not how stuff works. And Universal Audio has designed things the same way as the API consoles operate. On my box console, all 16 channels of the summing are clean channels. The transformers and the op amps are all in the master section. So when I do mixes on my API console, all the color is coming from the master section. And when you look at Luna, Luna is set up the same way. You can either apply Luna summing to the master bus or you can apply it to groups. And hold off on groups, we're going to get to that next. But for this first test, I just want to do a general pass of how mixing works on most API consoles when you do a general mix. We're going to send everything into my API console and do just a straight print. We're going to apply, and everything's at unison on the console. And then we're going to do a straight print on Luna, in Luna, with the API summing on the master bus at unison as well.
Run till the stars shine through the darkness, make it your home. 'Cause that westward sun burns so much brighter, you're on the run. Darker the places, smaller those spaces, and all of that nothing fun. The days grow shorter, and the years shuffle by. Remember a time when the darkness was a quiet you craved, and the light is more like a judgment than the freedom it offers you now. Run to your shelter, run to your light, 'cause that westward sun burns so much brighter when you're on the run. Darker the places, smaller those spaces.
One of the things I really like about my box console is that it's got a pair of 527 compressors built into it. They default on the master section, but as you saw in the tracking video in part 2, you can route those to either of the first 4 channels on the box console so that you can use it during tracking as well. Whenever I do mixes through my box console, I always have those 527s on. They sound really good. I'm usually not doing much, 1 or 2 dB of compression, but it generally just makes things sound a little bit bigger, and sometimes it even widens the stereo image depending on the source. So now you're going to see a pass of how I would normally mix something through my console. Inside of Luna, we're going to have the Luna summing, and then I'm throwing an API 2500 plugin onto the master bus as well to mimic the settings on that. I deep dived into the 2500 manual and made sure I was setting stuff as closely as possible because the 2500 can do a lot more things than the 527. So I've matched those as closely as possible, but it's going to be just a little different because I've found in the real world with 2500 compressors, they're a little bit more colored than the 527 is. And just one more technicality to keep in mind, and I think I've got this right, but from what I understand, the 527s on the box console are a little different because they share the transformers in the master section. I don't think they share the op amps, but check me on that. I'm not sure. So it's just a little bit different on the 527. So probably if you're being nitpicky, expect a little bit more color on the Luna channels.
Wrote songs in cages, beautiful never afford. 'Cause that was word song burns so much brighter. You're on the run. Darker the places, smaller those spaces. The all of that hard living from. You're on the run. When you turn 31, hard living ain't fun. You crave something stable, try to enable healthier ways. With bright city lights drown out the night. Run till the stars shine through the darkness, make it your home. 'Cause that was word song.
Now it's time to have some fun because, I mean, quite honestly, what's the point of having an analog console like that if you're not going to push it into the red and go nuts? So the last segment was generally the level that I mix into the console at. I also have a tube compressor from my friend Chris at Hindi Amps that I have on the master bus, but that's a whole nother story. I've done a review on that, but I kind of gain stage between hitting the API a certain way and hitting the tube compressor a certain way at this point, but I digress. Anyway, so at this point, we're going to drive the snot out of the console. We're going to drive the snot out of Luna and see what happens. So I could feed the levels into the console harder, but at this point, I'm going to keep everything at Unity like we've been doing. I'm going to turn the faders up all the way in the summing section on my console, and I'm going to take the fader in Luna, the headroom fader, and turn that up all the way and see what happens, because there's not really a scientific way that I can match pushing my analog console and match pushing Luna, because Luna, when you start turning up the headroom knob to drive it harder, Luna actually kind of compensates on the output automatically, I believe, which is a really nice feature. I appreciate that they did that. But for tests like this, it just makes things a little more difficult. So for me to just be as transparent and close as possible on this test, I'm going to push my faders as far up as they'll go, feeding it the same way, and I'm going to push the Luna fader all the way up. And we'll listen to summing, and then we'll listen to it with compression.
San Francisco, let myself go. Not in the ways that all of my friends said help me to grow. Slept through the days, worked in the nights. Wrote songs in cages, in beautiful places I never afford. 'Cause that was word song burned so much brighter. You're on the run. Darker the places, smaller those spaces. All of that hard living from. You're on the run. Turn 31. Hard living ain't fun. You crave something stable, try to enable healthier ways. With bright city lights drown out the night. Run till the stars shine through the darkness, make it your home. 'cause that westward sun burns so much brighter. You're on the run. Darker the places, smaller those spaces, and all of that God living fun.
There's one more thing that we need to address in terms of mixing techniques on API consoles, and that's their group system. On my box console, unfortunately, there are no groups, so you can't send to groups. You just have the master bus. But when you move up to larger consoles like the 1608 or the AXS, Legacies, or any of those, you have groups on those. And the cool thing about the groups on the API consoles is that those groups each have transformers and op amps on them as well. And when you look at how Universal Audio has, cloned the API system to do their Luna summing, API's done that as well. When you first set up a session, when you have individual tracks, you'll notice in Luna that you can't put the Luna summing on individual channels, but you can apply Luna summing to groups in the master bus, and they're limiting you to doing it that way because that's how actual API consoles work. So since my box console does not have groups on it, I'm going to try to mimic that kind of group workflow by doing 4 stems of my mix. I'm going to send a vocal stem by itself and print that through my console. I'm going to do an instrument stem, print that through the console, do a bass stem, and then a drum stem. So I'll have 4 separate stems of my mix that have each passed through the console and the op amps and transformers. Then we're going to send all 4 of those through the console one more time to kind of just cheat and mimic how a bigger API console would work, because again, those groups color things a little bit as well. So that's how we're going to kind of copy that and mimic that on my console. And in Luna, I'm just going to set up 4 groups and do the same thing. I'm going to split things out the same way and apply Luna summing to those groups and the master bus, obviously.
Slept through the days, worked in the nights, wrote songs in cages, beautiful places I never afford, 'cause that westward sun burns so much brighter. You're on the run. Darker the places, smaller those spaces, and all of that hard living fun. You're on the run. When you turn 31, hard living ain't fun. Something stable, try to enable.
I honestly wasn't sure how well that was going to work out, but after listening through my first normal bounce to the console and then listening to my 4-pass mimicking the kind of API group layout, I'm hearing a little bit of a sound difference. It's subtle, but regardless, I think that was a successful idea to kind of pull that off. At this stage, I've been so thorough with everything, I still feel a little bad cheating like that. So I've asked for help from my friend Jason. Jason's another Arkansas studio owner. He's a couple of hours away from here, and he owns Red Barn Studio. Jason used to own one of the original API box consoles, and he's since upgraded to a bigger 1608. So Jason's offered to run stems through his console into the groups on his 1608 and then do a print, so you can actually get a real world kind of example of how that sounds. In the video, I'm not gonna do a direct comparison of how my cheating 4-pass thing sounded compared to his real group bounce, but I'm gonna include files in a session that's gonna be in the video description here, so if you want to listen back and forth, you can. I don't know if they're going to sound different or not. We'll see. But I wanted to give you guys a real world example of what it sounds like when you're using a bigger API console with groups in it. So let's take a listen to that real quick.
Run till the stars shine through the darkness, make it your home. 'Cause that westward sun burns so much brighter, you're on the run. Darker the places, smaller those spaces, and all of that hard living fun. Days grow shorter, and the years shuffle by. Remember a time when the darkness was a quiet you craved, and the light is more like a judgment than the freedom it offers you now.
At this point, I think that's probably a wrap for this part 3 video. I've got a lot of other ideas of things we could do to kind of compare the Luna summing to the API console, but there's just so many approaches in terms of how people like to mix. My approach has changed a lot in the last year and a half of owning this console. I do things totally different than I did originally, and it's kind of just a learn as you go thing. So I've done the same thing I did with the part 2 video because I realize a lot of people don't have Apollo hardware and they can't use Luna. So I've included a session file where everything's labeled and level matched as closely as possible, which was tough to do, quite honestly. When you get into a mix scenario where you have compression on some tracks and you don't on others, and you're driving the summing and everything and, you know, getting analog color, it's crazy. So I've tried to level match stuff as closely as possible, but some things are just going to be off a little bit because that's just how this game works at this stage with all these different comparisons. So you've got files you can download and listen and A/B and do your own thing. But I think that's a wrap on the series. Thank you so much if you've made it this far and watched all the videos. This was a crazy idea. It was a passion project. It ended up being a lot more ambitious than I anticipated, and it ate up like 2 months of my life trying to get this done. So I've worked hard on it, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. You found it informative and more than anything entertaining, because I think all this probably ended up being over an hour long at least. So it's a lot to digest, but hopefully you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for more stuff in the future. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I'm going to start doing more product reviews on the channel for sure, but if you guys have any other crazy ideas and you want to shoot them my way, let me know. I love communicating with you guys. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.